Hey, and good afternoon, everyone. Happy Wednesday, and welcome to our third part of our Coping with COVID series. We're excited to be back with you this week and hope that you've taken a lot away from what our conversations have been so far. And today is just to kind of continue that. For today's discussion, we're going to talk on how to find and maintain family balance in an unbalanced time. So kind of interesting, right? So Kal, welcome back with me. I'm excited that you're here with me for the third time. How's your week been?
It's been great. It's a pleasure to be here as always.
Good, good. So Kal, I was hoping maybe for our viewers who weren't able to tune in with us last week, could you just give a short recap of what we discussed?
Let's go way back. In our first session, we talked about mindfulness and the importance of mindfulness in the context of family environments, being present, focusing on observation and reflection in that sense, but also the other pillar of mindfulness, which is about wisdom. What's the next step? Gaining the perspective. Figuring out what matters most to us, just creating this sense of intention that allows us to orient in ways that are helpful in our lives. And last week we built on that idea, just in talking about some of the hidden factors of the hidden stress factors, and talking about things that get in the way as it comes to stress, and finding out ways to soothe stress when it shows up in our lives. And today we're going to really build on that again in terms of talking about balance in a family environment, and how do we find that balance in work, school, and family life, and in home life, especially, of course, in the context of the pandemic, as so many of us are working remotely from home.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, our homes have become everything to us, so definitely finding that balance is important. And before we kind of get into our discussion, I just want to remind our viewers, we are here for you and would love to hear from you throughout this conversation. So any thoughts, any comments, any questions that may come up, don't hesitate to drop it down in the comments. We would really love to hear from you and be in on the discussion. So, Kal, kind of the first thing, and actually I've gotten this question a few times from people, is as the threat of the pandemic evolves, we're kind of going into another sort of phase with it. What are some of the trends in mental health that you're noticing right now?
Yeah, I think that's an important question in the sense that, it's not when we advertised for this series 2 or 3 months ago, things have changed so much. Of course, we're still there's still high threat, and many people are suffering right now because of COVID. But we're in a different stage of the pandemic now. So, some of us are even looking over our shoulder, just thinking, what the hell was that? How am I supposed to process that? Or are we just coming out the other side? And we've really been, as a society, in a kind of survival mode for so long, and now there's a different sense. Even though, as I said, the threat level is still high, there's a different sense of what it means, what's most important to us. What does it mean to live well? What does mental health really look like? We're still, of course, in the middle of Mental Health Awareness Month. So we're starting to think about our own well-being, and recognizing that in life, so often we just go along. But now I think for many of us, we've taken time to reflect and think, okay, what's really important. Now, in line with that, we're seeing coming into the vernacular this term called languishing, which is not crisis mode, and it's not everything is great. It's somewhere in between, where everything's okay, but it's not wonderful. So we're going to hear that word more and more. And I think as people look back and reflect on the past year and what it is that's most important in their lives, and who they're striving to become, and the struggles that they're working with, we're starting to ask the question, is there more to life than just getting by and surviving? And if so, what does that really mean for me? And what does that look like in the context of my life? So that's another question in the context of finding balance in the family.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's quite an interesting term. I'll definitely listen out for that. And I can, for myself, feel that way, so I'm sure, our viewers maybe can relate to that too. So just out of curiosity, why is finding balance so hard to do?
Well, finding balance is hard to do at the best of times. If you think, let alone a pandemic. Obviously, the pandemic has put a squeeze on finding balance and made it even more difficult. But if we think about what we have to get right, nutrition, school priorities for our kids, if we have kids, thinking about getting enough sleep.
Yeah.
I think I didn't see you on just there, Jean. Yes, and finding meaning at work and being productive at work, getting enough exercise, maintaining healthy relationships. All of these things, if we look back at them, it's a lot of stuff to get right. So, so the question isn't why is it hard to find balance, is really, it's really saying it is hard to find balance, and that's the reality of life. So how do we do that when balance is so hard to find? And really, we talk about all these hacks and these secrets and various other things to live a good life, but really balance is the superpower. Balance is the essence that we're all really looking for if we can achieve it in our lives. And of course, it's not like we get through one day and we say, yay, I did balance today, and that's great. Although it is great, it's I've got to wake up and do the whole thing again tomorrow and hope that I don't get a curveball, or that a family member falls ill, or that some crisis comes up. Balance is really, really hard to find in our day-to-day, and hopefully we can touch on some ways in which we can help find balance more sustainably.
Yeah, well, why don't we get into that? I mean, in the midst of a chaotic environment, I mean, how do you do it?
So I think for me, I like to think of this idea of baking things in. So
you said baking things in?
Baking, excuse my easy accent. Baking, like the Great British Bake Off. Baking.
Okay.
So what do we mean by that? Well, of course, we talked about mindfulness and intention and figuring out what matters most. When we're clear on what that is, then the next step is really figuring out, okay, so this is what I care about. Now, what are the actions and the steps consistent with that intention, with that value? And so we start thinking about small steps in our day-to-day life in that direction. Say, for example, let's use the example of care. If caring for others, caring for ourselves matters, then what's consistent with caring? Can you give an example of maybe what would be consistent with being caring, Jean? What would
making breakfast for my family?
Making breakfast for your family. Yeah. So making it from scratch, for example, or and not, and taking the time to do that. So that would then mean that you would need to get a good night's sleep before you woke up in the morning. And it starts to connect the dots in terms of why getting enough sleep would be important, or why you eating well would be important, so that you have enough energy to make breakfast, which is something you care about, and it's time with family and the like. So it's trying to recognize that in making breakfast, there's care, the intention of care, but there's also the intention of connection. There's the intention of family time and being family oriented. So it's trying, as I say, to bake in as much as we can within just sometimes quite mundane or simple activities. doing the dishes is sometimes a necessity. Can we reframe the way that we do the dishes and say, okay, well, this is time with family, or it's time for me to reflect in my own mind and just to think about nothing, or to whatever it means, and just starting to view our lives as opportunities to integrate what matters most, rather than seeing it in compartments, which is, here's this thing that I really don't like to do, and then when I've done this thing I really don't like to do, I can get to the good stuff. Because inevitably what we'll find with that is there's more things that we don't like to do than things we do like to do, or have enough time for the things that matter to us.
That is so true. I'm going to rethink what I think about with dishes, because I am one of those people where I don't like it. I don't like dishes. But you have a point there that you're just going to run out of time, right? If you try to do everything, but integrating it helps with, I feel like, your time, doesn't it?
It does. And it's also seeing our relationship with doing the dishes. Why is doing the dishes feel like such a chore? Maybe because at some point in our lives we got told, oh, you must do the dishes, and we see it as some kind of punishment, or some kind of something I've got to do. But it's recognizing that, hey, this is just doing the dishes. It can be cathartic. It's time, I can involve my family and have them dry the dishes, and we can chat about the day and really use it as quality time. And of course, that's quite a basic example, but we can take that philosophy into day to day, and even find the most difficult aspects of our day as having meaning, as there being relevant, and that more than that those moments can be for us, even in the difficult. Whether that's about growth, or it's about time together, or working through relationship matters, whatever it may be, we can start to see it as, there's something in here for me. And I think we touched on that last week, but I think it's worth bringing up again. If I could just add to that, Jean, just this sense, so we're talking about baking in this philosophy. We've also got this idea that we can start to automate things in our lives. The things that are working well, just almost putting them on an automated system, and say, this is just something that I do. Because if we see our mind, our brain, if you like, as having a limited amount of very expensive fuel to run it, and that we actually have less mental resource than we like to think that we do, and we can be protective of it, then actually making decisions ahead of time can really relieve us of some of that decision-making fatigue that we can experience, or decision fatigue, that is a term that we use as well. So really, this is seeing our mind, our brain as being limited, very precious resource, and then just saying, okay, where am I spending when am I spending that fuel, or where am I expending that fuel on things that maybe I don't have to decide on? I can take that decision off the table. So the idea here is making one decision that removes 1,000 decisions, and just minimizing the number of decisions that we're having to make day to day. And that could be as something as simple as deciding in advance on what we're going to wear for the week, or what we're going to eat for the week, or whatever it may be, but just standardizing our week so that we can focus our energy on things that matter.
Yeah, and I can certainly relate to that. I mean, I've definitely gotten to the habit of meal prep or planning, at least dinner time. Breakfast and lunch seem to come together, but it was always, there's that meme out there, right? You're always going to want to, or you always have to decide what you have for dinner for the rest of your life, or something like that. So just, and that just takes so much stress off. Just knowing, okay, Tuesday we're going to have tacos. It just is a relief, and a lot less stress. So that's a really great point.
Yeah. And of course, we're using very basic examples here, but it's more the philosophy that matters. The philosophy of automating, the philosophy of baking things in. The other philosophy that we might use here is improvising, because of course, we may have been on a run in our lives where we're doing all these things, eating well, moving right, and then we have we have a child, or you know, or we change jobs, or something happens, or we have a loved one fall ill, something happens which shifts, and then we say, oh, I can't do that anymore. Well, the philosophy of improvising then becomes very important, which is, okay, now in this situation, I don't have the same opportunities. What are the new opportunities in this next situation that I'm in? And just being flexible and adaptable in the way that we meet those needs, but being flexible all the same.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we've had to come accustomed to being flexible, right? With things changing so much. So that's a really, another great point, Cal.
Yeah. I mean, that's the elephant in the room, really, isn't it? Is the pandemic. We've all shifted in this way and had to shift. And after the kind of crisis moments that the pandemic brings up, it also forces us to adjust in many, many, many different ways.
Yeah. And I mean, along with adjusting and acceptance of change and all those other things, I mean, of course, we need some time to kind of switch off, right? Mm-hmm. So what can we do if we're finding it hard to do that?
Yeah. Thanks for asking that question, Jean, because I think it's something that we can struggle with. And that's, especially if we're remote working from home, and finding it difficult to switch off. Now, typically in our day-to-day, we think that maybe work, for example, can be stressful. But really, it's not our time at work that causes us the most stress. What oftentimes causes us stress is a lack of recovery from stress. So if we're coming back from, say, an 8 to 5 job, or leaving or switching off from an 8 to 5 job, the hours we have after that, if they're spent thinking about work, if they're spent with work on our mind or anxiety on our mind, then of course that's not very good recovery. And so that's what leads to burnout. It's not the 8 to 5, it's the lack of recovery after 5 o'clock comes. So it's really starting to see the importance of transitions here. That is, creating rituals at the end of a day at, say, 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, whenever it is, but making that an important step to transition into home, personal life, something else. So it could be something as simple as shutting down the laptop rather than just closing the laptop, that physical sense of closing it down. It could be about changing, having a shower and getting a change of clothes. It could be, if you have kids, getting on the floor and rolling around with your young ones and just, or getting involved, being outside with them. But just making that intentional transition so that it was work, now it's not work. And if it is a problem in terms of thinking about work outside of work, then finding ways to down-regulate, to soothe, to work with your mind in different ways. And if you do typically have a busy mind, that could be more about engaging your mind in different ways, say doing kind of puzzles or hobbies where your mind is engaged rather than sitting in front of a TV. Some people find that more relaxing, but it really depends on how our minds work, but starting to meet our minds in these different ways.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I mean, and I think that transition time, if we don't have the luxury of a different space, can be really helpful too. I know for myself, my desk in my workspace is in my bedroom, which I know is probably not the best, but the only space that I have. And so I like you're talking about a transition time, because how I transition is just like that, turning off the computer and then going downstairs. And then that's when that, family time and things like that start. So.
Yeah, and I'm like Eugene. I'm very fortunate in having a closed door. You might see it behind me, but if you're in a kind of open plan space and there's distractions and things, that brings a different set of challenges. But it's just about figuring out, what would it mean for me to turn off here? What does that really look like? for me, and it could be as something around technology, but it could also be some other physical act that just gets you out of work and into home.
Yeah. And I mean, we're also been spending a lot more time with our families, right? Whether it be, I mean, my significant other is just in the other room. Luckily, my little one's not home, but for a while, we were all together all the time, right? Which can be, hard, and balancing all of that, and then also meeting their needs, right? So what can we do if we're working so hard to meet the needs of our loved ones, and that we struggle meeting the needs of ourselves?
So I think it really touches on what we talked about before in terms of integration and recognizing that there isn't my time and their time as much as time together in those kind of situations. And Dan Millman, The Way of the Peaceful Warriors, it calls these family situations a cauldron for growth, and they really bring up the stuff that families tend to gloss over in the midst of day to day. It brings up our stuff. So just seeing it as an opportunity to connect, an opportunity to work through any kind of existing challenges that there are in the family environment, and an opportunity to be really the way out in terms of making this work for us, is around two principles: creativity and spontaneity. If we can be spontaneous in the midst of this, if we can be creative and finding new avenues to be with each other, then we're going to enjoy that time together. And there was, great examples of that early on. I think there was, all the puzzles in the world sold out because people were now buying puzzles, and these memes were going around that were keeping everyone entertained. And the question is, can we do that from a family perspective, and figuring out what's the DNA of your own family culture? And can you either transform that if it's not a culture that you're currently happy with, or just capitalize on it and just, really bring out the strengths of your family dynamics and play on those in what can be a very intense time. And of course, I think it goes without saying, giving ourselves some grace for the fact that it's difficult to live with other people, especially when we do it on a so frequently. I currently, I live with having moved from England a little over a year and a half ago, still living with my wife and our young 2-year-old. We're living with our parents-in-law, my parents-in-law, and there are some great benefits to that, but it's not easy all of the time. And it's just starting to recognize that we can give ourselves a break when it comes to having to be perfect the whole time, or just in this tension-free environment. I think it's a bit of a fallacy to think that there aren't moments where things can be difficult.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm curious, from our viewers' standpoint, what are things that you do with your family that have brought you closer through this time that we've all been together? And Kal, I'm going to pose that question as we wait for our viewers to kind of chime in. What have you done to help kind of bring your family together in this closed space?
Well, we definitely went through the puzzles phase early on. And we exhausted that. I'll put my hand up. I wasn't a great puzzle participant. But we have family in Charlotte and in other places too. And we just, we come in and on Zoom or whatever it may be, and do trivia, or we do place categories, or we just do something fun together that brings everyone together, and we can have a chat while we're doing it. So, and all the obvious stuff like taking walks when we can, and getting out and about. We're fortunate to have some space as well, and of course, being in a city environment, that's not always as easy. But it's really, again, this idea of capitalizing on your environment and trying to find ways to work with what you've got. And again, creativity and spontaneity really come into that. I'd love to hear any other thoughts about that. If there's anyone there who's willing to share, who's going to be the first one to drop a question? That's what I'm wondering.
Oh, it looks like Fran chimed in, your pal over here. She said, we've started going around our neighborhood and walking after work with all the 3 little ones, and it helps her family transition from the work mindset to the home and family mindset, which I think that's awesome. And it looks like Mary Beth, she said, obstacle courses in the backyard, and we make efforts to see our parents every weekend. So I think those are awesome things to do.
Yeah. Great to have you here, Fran and Mary Beth. Yeah. So again, very, in a way, quite different, and you're really thinking about our own family dynamics and what matters there. But it's just really about getting out as much as we can and using our environment to our advantage. It's kind of common sense, but it's just having that energy to say, you know what, we don't feel like doing it, but we're going to do it anyway. Yes. Yeah. And Fran's coming in with hi, pal. And I'm curious to hear, Fran, how PAL has worked out for you. Remember, we talked about that in our first Facebook Live. PAL being in terms of working with family members who we may be struggling to communicate with, taking that idea of PAL, which was purposeful, agendaless listening, and being there. So, Fran, if you have any experience with that since we last talked about it, I'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, and I'll share too, Cal. My 2 things with my family have been gardening outside and dance parties. So whenever the tension starts to get a little bit high, we turn on the music and we dance it out, and it usually works. Usually, which is fun. Yeah. But speaking of that, and of course, viewers, please chime in. But I have a question that I was hoping we can address in the final part of our time here. Is how can we support a loved one that may be struggling?
Yeah. So I think that PAL approach is a helpful place to start with that. So just to reiterate, PALs being an acronym, being a PAL being an acronym for purposeful, agendaless listening. We so often come in with our own thoughts about how things should be, or what it would take for someone to feel better. We kind of have this rescue fantasy in our minds. If only they did what I think, that it would be good for them. But they can typically sense that, and people typically know the answers for themselves. It's just they struggle. And so it's really being there without an agenda, without memory, without any sense of expectation or judgment, which is really, of course, hard to do. It's not easy to be that person, but it's as far as possible, just being there. And, something as simple as saying, I don't understand what you're going through, but every part of me wants to. And because that's the reality of the situation, is that we don't really know what someone else is going through, whether that's a child or a partner or a spouse. And it's just a sense of saying, I'm here, really, in short. And even things like, we often say, don't worry, or don't be upset. And we recognize our invalidating words, even when they're really well intentioned. So it's really being quite aware of the way in which we communicate verbally with others, and trying to communicate more emotionally than verbally. When I say that, I mean kind of taking that logical left brain approach and saying, okay, here's how we'll fix it. And of course, problem solving is great, it has a place, but if we're not in a good space emotionally, we're not going to resonate well with that. And so it's finding out how we relate before we start to reason, and just starting to think about it in that way.
Absolutely. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I think you picked up on Fran's comment here.
Oh, no. Actually, I had another question. So let's address Fran first. So go ahead, go for it, Cal.
So Fran has said it's so taking the POW approach has helped be more aware when having conversations. Before I would multitask, but now I realize that it's important to be a pal to my kids, husband, and everyone I encounter. So thanks, Fran, for sharing that. And I think that's an important message there as well, because Fran used that idea of multitasking. To go back to the beginning, when I talked about baking things in, it's not really about multitasking, because multitasking is this idea of doing so many things, trying to get so much done. It's more about making the situations or environments that we're in more meaningful, and trying to connect with those situations in more meaningful ways. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Fran, and it sounds like you're being more, you've been able to be more present to your family in that respect, which is really pleasing to hear. And Jean, you said you had a question.
Yeah, no, that's okay. My question, Cal, was kind of follow up to those phrases that we use with our family members. Could you give us some examples, like the ones you said, don't worry, or that are kind of invalidating? Could you tell us maybe better phrases, some examples that may work better?
Yeah, so I think what's more important than the actual phrase is the approach, and it's the validating, normalizing approach. So it's saying, I know how I would feel the same way, which you can say as the truth, which is if you were in that position, probably you would feel angry or upset or even low if you were struggling in that way. And perhaps validating something which say it's normal to feel that way. It's I can understand how you would feel that way, and without first jumping to that answer or that solution, it's just finding that place where it's I'm here, I see you. If there's anything you need, I'm here, and we don't need to do anything about the situation apart from you knowing that I'm here to support you. So it's more the approach, because if we get too in our heads about, or what should I say?
Yeah, no, of course.
Kind of logical reasoning, but I think it's a really good question. And I think I had another point to make, but maybe it's not that important because I forgot it.
Well, as you think of it, as we come to the half-hour point for our talk, I wanted to see, Cal, is there any last words of wisdom that you'd like to leave our viewers with as our series and this conversation comes to a close?
Yeah, firstly, I'm sad to be coming to an end of this series. It's been fun doing this series on a weekly basis and having all the viewers here with us as well. Any final thoughts? Well, not really, because I think that'd be too generic in terms of, we're all in such unique situations with the pandemic, but maybe it's helpful to just think of that idea of being a pal in our conversations, and just and today's message, I think, is really about baking in what matters to our day-to-day, whether it be mundane, whether it's difficult, and just seeing what's in here for me that I can really enjoy and connect with my family. And And yeah, so that's it. No real kind of last message there, but I hope in some way this has been helpful for the viewers. Hopefully we can do it again sometime, because I enjoyed it, and I think there's so much more ground to cover. But it's been fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Cal. And I think those are two wonderful takeaways: is making things in the mundane, and be a pal. So I love it. And I just want to thank all of our viewers, those who have tuned in with us today and for the last few weeks that we've been with you. If you do have any feedback for us about maybe another series that we could do, topics that you're interested in, feel free to leave them in the comments, or also, you can message us on Facebook as well. But I just hope that everyone really enjoyed the series as much as Cal and I did. And I do hope you all enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye,
And
everyone.
hope to see you all again soon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.